If you spend, any time scrolling through tech news these days or just listening to the general buzz online, the conversation about Mars has fundamentally shifted.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally different now.
Right. Like it used to be pure science fiction, Ray Bradbury stuff, just these distant, maybe in our lifetime dreams.
Yeah, the classic sci-fi tropes.
But now, I mean, with Starship tests happening down in Texas and timelines being thrown around for, 2029? Or the early 2030s?
Yeah, those dates are coming up fast.
It feels weirdly imminent.
Mm.
We're actually watching the rockets land. We're seeing the hardware being built. And I think it's incredibly easy to get seduced by the engineering of the transport, the whole, getting there part.
It is. It's the most photogenic part of the challenge.
Right.
Right?
Totally.
Rockets are loud, they're visceral, they represent this very tangible fire and brimstone kind of human progress.
Yeah, it looks great on a live stream.
Exactly. But there is this massive, uncomfortable silence surrounding what happens the moment the engines actually cut off.
When the dust settles on the red planet.
Right. Because getting to Mars, that's a physics problem.
You're good at physics.
We are. But living on Mars, that is a biology problem. And biology is it's a lot messier than physics.
That's the thing. Once you step off that rocket, you are a biological entity in a place that is actively hostile to your existence.
Highly hostile.
And I don't mean hostile in a, bad neighborhood kind of way.
Right.
I mean, you literally have no air. The soil is toxic, there is zero water, and there is no food. You are a soft, squishy organism in a hard vacuum.
Yeah, we are not built for it at all.
No. So before we start packing our bags for the red planet, we really need to talk about the time we tried to practice.
And we didn't practice in space.
No, we didn't.
Yeah.
We practiced in the Arizona desert, just north of Tucson, back in the early 1990s.
The Biosphere 2 experiment?
Yes. This is our deep dive today. Biosphere 2. This is, without a doubt, the most ambitious, the most expensive, and frankly, kind of the most insane rehearsal for space colonization ever attempted.
It really was.
This group of people tried to build Earth 2.0 inside a giant glass bottle. They sealed themselves in for 2 years and just tried to see if they could survive without any help from the outside world.
And the story of what actually happened inside that bottle, it's essential reading for anyone who thinks colonizing Mars will be a walk in the park.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a story that involves suffocation, starvation, warring factions, and a building that, and I mean this completely, literally started eating the oxygen.
It's a wild ride. It really is. But I think to really grasp why this matters for us today, we should probably slow down and start with the basic biological problem of leaving Earth.
Good idea. Let's unpack that slowly.
You brought up this term earlier when we were going through our sources, heterotrophs.
Right. Heterotrophs. It sounds a bit technical.
A little bit like high school biology.
Exactly. But it's the fundamental definition of what a human being actually is. We are heterotrophs, which simply means we cannot create our own food.
Right.
We are consumers.
Unlike plants.
Exactly. Plants are autotrophs. They can just take sunlight, water, and minerals, non-living things, and magically turn them into energy. They make the food.
The producers.
Right. We, however, we have to eat living things. We have to eat the plants, or we have to eat the animals that ate the plants. We are completely, totally dependent on a biological supply chain.
So if you go to Mars, you can't just, bring a lifetime supply of protein bars.
No.
It's just too heavy. You need a rocket the size of the Empire State Building just for the snacks.
It's mathematically unsustainable. To survive off-world for years, you have to bring the producers with you.
You have to pack up nature.
You need to pack up a whole chunk of nature. You need the plants to make oxygen and food. You need microbes to break down your waste so the plants can eat it. You need natural water filtration.
Basically, you have to take a slice of Earth's biosphere, put it in a glass box, and ship it to Mars.
And that right there is where the hubris really kicks in.
Oh, major hubris.
Because we looked at Earth, what they called Biosphere 1, and we honestly thought, how hard could it be to make a copy?
How hard could it be, right? Just put some trees in a dome.
Right. But Biosphere 1 has had about 3.5 billion years of R&D to work out the bugs.
Fair point.
It's vast. It has huge oceans and a massive atmosphere to buffer any mistakes. If a volcano goes off, the Earth absorbs the shock. But when you try to shrink all that massive complexity down into a 3-acre bubble,
you lose the buffer.
You lose the buffer entirely. Things get twitchy very, very fast.
So let's set the scene for you listening. It's the late 80s, early 90s. You have this oil tycoon, Ed Bass.
Very wealthy guy.
Yeah, deep pockets. And he has this vision that is part rigorous science and part, I don't know, utopian commune.
A bit of both, yeah. The New Age movement was still pretty influential.
Right. So he puts up $200 million
Which is staggering.
in 1991 money. That is a massive amount of cash.
It was a huge investment. And they didn't just build a big greenhouse.
No, no.
If you look at photos of Biosphere 2, even today, if you visit it, it looks like a temple from some sci-fi civilization.
It really does. It's this stark white lattice structure, completely covered in thousands of glass panels, just rising out of the desert scrub.
It looks very geometric, very futuristic, and very alien compared to the landscape.
Yeah. And it covers 1.2 hectares. For context, if you're trying to picture this, that's about the size of 2.5 football fields.
Or like a really large middle school.
Yeah, exactly. But inside that space, they didn't just plant neat rows of corn and call it a day. They tried to cram in the entire world.
The entire world. They built 7 distinct biomes.
7.
And the level of detail they went into was obsessive. They weren't just simulating these environments, they were physically reconstructing them.
Let's actually take the listener on a quick tour of this place. Let's walk through it. Imagine you step through the airlock. Where do you start?
Well, you'd likely start in the rainforest biome.
Which is the biggest one, right?
Yeah, the biggest system in there. They actually brought in plant species straight from the Amazon. They built this thing called the Cloud Mountain.
A literal mountain.
A literal man-made mountain inside the glass. And it had this intense misting system to simulate daily rainfall.
Wow.
It was incredibly hot, very humid, and just dense with heavy vegetation. The idea was that this biome would be the primary engine of the whole system.
Like a lung.
Exactly like a super lung, pumping out huge amounts of oxygen and scrubbing the carbon dioxide.
Okay, so you push your way through the humid jungle, you're sweating, and then you come out to the ocean biome.
Which, again, was not just a big tank of salt water.
Right.
It was a 2.6 million liter replica of a Caribbean coral reef.
That's insane. They built a reef in Arizona.
They imported real living coral, real reef fish, real seawater. They even had a mechanical wave machine installed.
Because reefs need movement, right?
Yeah, stagnation kills coral reefs. They need the current. It even had a little sandy beach area where the crew could stand and literally look out at their own tiny private sea.
And chemically speaking, the ocean does a lot of heavy lifting for a planet, right?
Huge amounts. It's a massive heat sink, which helps regulate the temperature inside the glass. But more importantly, it's a carbon sink. The algae and the water itself constantly absorb CO2.
Okay, so from the beach, you move on to the mangrove wetland.
Right. These were essentially the kidneys of the operation.
The filters.
Exactly. Mangroves are incredible natural filters. This area served as the transition zone between the salty ocean water and the freshwater systems deeper in. The mud and the complex root systems were specifically designed to naturally clean the water as it circulated through the facility.
Amazing. And then from there, you hit the savanna.
The grassland.
Mm.
This was a transition zone. Lower humidity than the rainforest, totally different plant species, different soil chemistry.
And then the desert.
Modeled after the coastal fog deserts you'd find in Baja California.
Why a desert? I mean, if you want life, why build a barren desert?
It was absolutely crucial for moisture regulation.
Oh, I see.
Think about it. In a closed glass box with a steaming rainforest and a literal ocean, the humidity naturally wants to skyrocket to 100% everywhere.
Right, it would just be a sauna.
Exactly. The desert was supposed to be the dry counterbalance, a place where the air could cool and condensation could happen.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And finally, the last two biomes were the human zones. You had the agriculture biome.
The farm. And this is really where the rubber meets the road for survival. They had to grow 100% of their own food.
No grocery runs, no emergency care packages.
None. They had rice paddies, sweet potatoes, peanuts, bananas. They even brought in livestock.
They had animals in there.
Yeah, they had some pygmy goats, a flock of chickens, and they raised tilapia fish in the flooded rice paddies.
Oh, that's a smart use of space.
Very efficient. But the kicker here was no chemicals, no chemical pesticides, no synthetic fertilizers. It all had to be strictly biological control. Ladybugs eating aphids, that sort of thing.
And then the seventh biome, the human habitat.
The city, basically. This was a multi-story building inside the dome. It had private apartments for the crew, a library, a command center, advanced laboratories. It was a fully functional miniature human civilization.
Now, the most important rule of this entire setup was the closed loop. And I really want to stress what this actually means, because we've seen isolation experiments before, people in bunkers, but this was materially closed,
Completely airtight.
like submarine level.
Actually, it was significantly more airtight than a nuclear submarine or even the space shuttle.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They sealed all those thousands of glass panes with a custom silicone. They welded massive steel liners underneath the soil to prevent any gas from leaking down into the earth.
So the dirt was sitting on a steel floor.
Exactly. The rule was absolute. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out. No air, no water, no Uber Eats.
But the sources specify it was energetically open.
Right. That's the key distinction.
Let's break that down for the listener.
Sure. Energetically open means that sunlight could obviously pass freely through the glass to drive the photosynthesis of the plants. Heat could radiate out into the night sky, and they were connected to the outside power grid for electricity and data cables for computers.
But physically,
In terms of actual matter atoms, molecules, every single molecule of oxygen, every atom of carbon, every drop of water that was inside that dome on day one was all they would ever have for 2 whole years.
that is wild.
They were going to be recycling the exact same air and drinking the exact same water over and over again.
So September 26, 1991, the media is swarming the place. It's a huge spectacle. And the crew enters the airlock.
The Biosphereans, as they called them. 8 people in total. 4 men, 4 women.
And we should point out, these weren't random applicants off the street.
No. This wasn't some early reality TV show. These were serious, highly trained experts. You had specialized botanists, engineers, physicians, marine biologists.
People who knew exactly what they were doing.
Yes. They were selected for their technical skills, obviously, but also for their psychological resilience. It's actually very similar to how NASA selects astronaut corps today.
Right.
You need people who are incredibly competent, but also fully willing to suffer and potentially risk their lives for the sake of the mission.
Because they knew going in it was going to be hard.
They absolutely knew it would be a challenge, though I don't think they knew quite how tough it would get.
I can't even imagine. The door closes, you hear that heavy thud of the airlock ceiling behind you. That has to be an incredibly heavy psychological moment.
It's the moment you literally leave Earth.
Even though you can see the desert right outside the glass.
Right, you can see people walking around outside, but you are effectively on another planet. If your crops fail, you starve. If the air goes bad, you suffocate. You are now entirely dependent on the machine you've built.
Now, in the interest of full disclosure, based on the sources, there was one breach of the seal early on.
Yes, there was a medical emergency.
Walk us through that.
Very early in the mission, one of the crew members, Jane Pointer, had a severe accident with a grain hulling machine in the agriculture biome.
Ouch.
Yeah, she caught her hand in it and actually severed the tip of her finger.
Yikes. That's, yeah.
The onboard doctor, Roy Walford, he did what he could immediately. But reattaching a fingertip properly requires specialized microsurgery. They didn't have the gear for that.
So they had to make a call.
They made the difficult call to evacuate her. She left the dome for the surgery, was patched up at a local hospital, and she actually returned and went right back into the airlock the very next day.
And she brought something back with her, didn't she?
She did. She brought in a duffel bag of spare supplies, which caused a huge controversy outside in the media about the purity of the experiment.
Critics said they faked the closed loop.
Exactly. But honestly, aside from that one specific medical incident, the seal held perfectly.
Okay, so for the vast majority of those 730 days, they were sealed in tight. And almost immediately, this Earth 2.0 they had built started to turn on them.
It did. And it wasn't just one thing breaking. It was a slow, agonizing cascade of failures.
But the most terrifying issue, the one that really threatened to end the mission early, was the air.
Yes.
The oxygen crisis. This part of the deep dive plays out like a slow-motion horror movie.
It really does. So on Earth, outside right now, our atmosphere is roughly 21% oxygen.
20.9.
Right around there. And that is the absolute sweet spot for human physiological life. At the start of the experiment, the air inside Biosphere 2 was at exactly 20.9%. Perfect conditions.
But then it started dropping.
Week by week, month by month, the atmospheric sensors just showed this steady, undeniable decline.
And it definitely wasn't a leak, like a crack in the glass.
No, they ruled that out quickly. If it were a structural leak, the air pressure inside and outside would have equalized, but the pressure was fine. The oxygen was actively being consumed by something inside, and it wasn't being replaced.
So it's just vanishing.
By January of 1993, so they're about 16 months into the mission, The oxygen levels had crashed down to 14.5%.
Let's really put that number in perspective for the listener.
Mm.
What does 14.5% oxygen actually feel like to a human body?
It is brutal. That is the exact physiological equivalent of being instantly transported to an elevation of about 4,000 meters.
Wow.
Think about standing at the base camp of a major Himalayan mountain or being high up on the Tibetan plateau.
So if you aren't properly acclimated to that over weeks, you just get altitude sickness.
Instantly. Severe altitude sickness.
So the crew, they were just living with constant mountain sickness every single day.
Every day. They had severe chronic fatigue. They developed sleep apnea.
Wait, really?
Yes. They reported that they would frequently wake up gasping for air in the middle of the night because their bodies literally forgot to breathe enough times during sleep to keep oxygen levels up.
That is terrifying.
Their metabolism slowed way down. Everything was a struggle.
I read this one detail in the source logs where they said they couldn't even finish a normal sentence without having to stop and take a deep breath.
Yeah.
It was like they were all 90-year-old chain smokers suddenly.
And it heavily impacts the brain, too.
Right. Cognitive decline.
Cognitive function drops off a cliff when your brain is starved of oxygen. Simple arithmetic, like basic addition, became incredibly difficult for them.
These are highly trained scientists, and they can't do math.
Because they were sluggish, irritable, and physiologically, they were slowly dying. The onboard doctor, Roy Walford, who was actually 67 years old at the time, which makes this even harder on him, he was meticulously tracking his own cognitive and physical decline.
He must have been terrified.
He was. He explicitly warned the outside management team that if they didn't intervene soon, the crew was risking permanent neurological damage or potentially cardiac arrest.
So management had to make a choice. Preserve the scientific purity of the experiment and watch them potentially die or break the rules.
They chose life, thankfully. They finally broke the closed system rule regarding the atmosphere.
How did they fix it?
They drove massive tanker trucks full of pure liquid oxygen straight up to the facility in the desert, hooked them up to the internal air handlers, and just pumped it all in.
The crew actually described that moment as feeling like instant rebirth.
It was like a potent drug hitting their systems. They went from being these slow zombies just shuffling around the farm to literally running down the halls and laughing in this frenzy of sudden energy.
Wow.
It just shows you exactly how close to the physical edge they really were before the injection.
But here is the mystery, the real deep dive part of this whole crisis. Where did the oxygen actually go?
Right.
Because they had a rainforest, they had an ocean full of algae. The entire point of this $200 million facility was that the thousands of plants would manufacture the oxygen.
This completely stumped the scientists on the outside for a long time because it just didn't make sense chemically.
Let's slow down and look at the chemistry here.
Okay. See, photosynthesis and human respiration are supposed to be a perfectly balanced equation in a closed loop.
Right.
When you breathe, you take in oxygen and you breathe out carbon dioxide. When plants grow, they take in that exact carbon dioxide and release oxygen back to you.
A perfect circle.
A perfect circle. So, logically, if the oxygen was disappearing from the air, the carbon dioxide levels should have been going right through the roof.
Because the microbes in humans are making it, but the plants aren't converting it back.
Exactly.
So was the CO2 high?
It was high, yes, but not nearly high enough. The math simply did not balance. The oxygen was vanishing entirely, and the corresponding CO2 that should have been left behind was also vanishing.
It was like matter was just being deleted from existence.
It was baffling, until they finally figured it out.
So where was it hiding?
It was hiding in the walls.
Oh, the walls.
Well,
I remember reading this in the source material, and my jaw just dropped. The concrete was eating the air.
Yes. The entire Biosphere 2 structure was built using massive amounts of concrete. The deep foundations, the soil liners, the structural supports. Now, we think of concrete as just a dumb rock, right?
Yeah, just hard, inert stone.
But fresh concrete is actually an active chemical system. It contains a specific compound called calcium hydroxide.
Okay, let's do some high school chemistry here.
When the carbon dioxide in the air touches the exposed calcium hydroxide in the concrete, a chemical reaction naturally occurs. It turns into calcium carbonate, which is essentially limestone and water.
So the building itself was actively curing.
Yes. Over months and years, the concrete walls were literally scrubbing the carbon dioxide right out of the air and locking it into the stone.
So let me trace this fatal chain reaction. The soil microbes in the farm and rainforest were hyperactive, right?
Right. They put way too much compost in the soil.
So these microbes are eating all this organic matter and breathing out massive amounts of CO2.
Lots of it.
Normally, the plants would suck up all that extra CO2 and give the crew back the oxygen they desperately needed.
But the concrete.
The concrete was stealing the CO2 before the plants could even get to it.
Precisely. The building was actively competing with the rainforest for food.
And the building was winning.
The walls were acting like a massive, unintended carbon sink. When the scientists finally ran the numbers, they calculated that the concrete had absorbed enough oxygen locked away in the form of carbon dioxide to account for almost the entire missing deficit.
That is just a staggering design flaw. The literal geology of the building totally defeated the biology of the plants.
It really highlights how little we truly understood about material science interacting with closed systems. The designers were so focused on the complex biology, the plants, and the animals that the completely inert building materials sabotaged the whole thing without anyone noticing.
And if the suffocation wasn't enough of a nightmare, they were also dealing with a buildup of poison gas.
Right, nitrous oxide.
Laughing gas.
Yeah, laughing gas. Because the entire carbon cycle in the dirt was completely out of whack, those same soil microbes started naturally producing nitrous oxide as a byproduct.
And that's dangerous.
In small doses, no. But at the high concentrations building up inside the glass, it begins to interfere with the human body's ability to synthesize vitamin B12.
Oh, wow.
Which can rapidly lead to severe nerve damage and brain damage. So these 8 people, they were suffocating, they couldn't do math, and the very air they were gasping for was slowly becoming toxic to their nervous systems.
Just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Let's pivot now to the other basic human survival need, food. Because if they were gasping for air, the sources tell us they were also slowly starving.
Yes. The food situation was an absolute perfect storm of bad luck. 1991 just happened to be a very strong El Niño year in North America.
Which means what for Arizona?
In that part of the desert, an El Niño winter means unusually heavy, persistent cloud cover. So the one free resource they desperately needed, most unlimited desert sunlight to drive the photosynthesis for their crops, was suddenly in very short supply.
The plants just grew slower.
Much slower. And on top of the dark skies, they had severe pest outbreaks in the agriculture biome.
Because they couldn't use chemical bug spray.
Right, so broad mites attacked the sweet potatoes, and root knot nematodes attacked other crops, and fungi started wiping out the rice paddies.
So the harvest basically failed.
It didn't fail completely to zero, but it was drastically, dangerously insufficient for 8 working adults.
So what were they eating?
They were forced onto a diet that consisted almost entirely of sweet potatoes, beets, peanuts, and a few bananas, day in and day out.
And clearly not enough of them.
Not nearly enough. The entire crew entered a profound state of semi-starvation.
I looked up the medical numbers from the sources. The average weight loss across the crew was 16% of their total body mass.
That is a profound physical change.
For a 180-pound guy, that's losing almost 30 pounds.
They looked incredibly gaunt. There are pictures of them looking like castaways. Their bodies essentially went into a deep physiological survival mode, very similar to mammalian hibernation.
Just shutting down non-essential functions.
Exactly. Their core body temperatures visibly dropped. Their cholesterol levels plummeted. They were operating on the absolute minimum caloric intake legally required to just keep the heart beating while still doing manual farm labor.
And this naturally brings us to the psychological aspect of the experiment.
The human element.
Right. Because you have 8 people locked in a bottle, constantly suffocating, constantly starving, and having to work grueling 12-hour days just to keep the sweet potatoes alive. I have to assume the vibe in there wasn't great.
The vibe was intensely toxic. The extreme stress broke down their social cohesion almost completely.
The sources say the group of 8 literally split right down the middle into 2 deeply hostile factions, 4 against 4.
It was very much a Lord of the Flies situation.
Or like a really bad season of Survivor, but you literally can't vote anyone off the island. You're just stuck with them.
Exactly. There was one faction that firmly wanted to stick to the strict science and the original rules no matter what.
Let the experiment run, even if it hurts.
Right. And the other faction desperately felt they needed to intervene and change things to save the biosphere and themselves. The disagreement got so bitter, they literally stopped speaking to one another on a social level.
I mean, they stopped talking entirely.
Verbal communication was reduced to the absolute bare minimum required to just keep the facility machinery running.
Like, turn that water valve.
Yeah. Check that oxygen gauge. Nothing else. No pleasantries, no sharing dinner conversation. Just a cold, silent hostility, entirely fueled by hypoxia and severe hunger.
That is so intense.
Some crew members later wrote in their memoirs that they would walk through a small room in the habitat and actively pretend the people from the other faction weren't even physically standing there.
Just ghosting them in a glass box. But amidst all this misery, there is this one moment of psychological clarity in the sources that really, really stuck with me.
Is it the sweet potato anecdote?
Yes, the sweet potato. This is from the memoirs of one of the crewmen.
It's a fascinating observation. He was describing the everyday experience of eating a sweet potato that he himself had planted, grown, harvested, and cooked.
And he wrote that eating it felt like he was, quote, eating his own body.
It sounds totally bizarre, almost like a starvation hallucination, but it's actually a profound, mathematically true scientific realization.
Let's unpack that because it's wild.
Think about it. On Earth, out here, when you eat a potato, the carbon atoms that make up that starch came from the air somewhere.
Right.
Maybe that carbon originally came out of a factory smokestack in China,
Mm-hmm.
or a volcano erupting in Iceland, or a cow exhaling in Texas. The atmospheric mixing on Earth is just so massive.
The carbon pool is global. It's anonymous.
Anonymous, exactly. But inside Biosphere 2, the carbon pool was incredibly tiny. The air cycled incredibly fast. So the carbon atoms in that specific sweet potato he was eating had just been floating in the air a few weeks prior. And who put that carbon into the air?
The crew did.
By exhaling.
Wow. So he literally breathed out the carbon dioxide.
Bruh.
The sweet potato plant sucked his exact breath up, turned it into a starch molecule, and then he ate it.
He was literally consuming his own exhalations in solid form. He realized in that moment that the philosophical barrier between me and the outside world had entirely dissolved.
That's kind of beautiful, but also deeply terrifying.
He realized he wasn't just living in the ecosystem, he was the ecosystem. The atoms were just swapping places between his lungs and the dirt, rapidly.
It's like living inside your own lungs.
It violently highlights the reality of what a biosphere actually is. We are all just recycled atoms. It's just that out here on Earth, the cycle is so huge and slow that we can completely ignore it.
But in there, you couldn't ignore it for a second.
Not at all.
Let's talk about the other inhabitants of this dome, because the humans were miserable, they were starving, but at least they actually survived the 2 years. The animals, not so much.
It was an absolute ecological massacre in there. Biologists looking back at the data actually call it the Great Dying.
Let's look at the numbers. They originally introduced roughly 3,800 distinct species into this dome.
Right. A huge variety of plants, insects, fish, small mammals, reptiles.
And within the 2 years.
About 40 to 60% of all those species either went completely extinct or became functionally extinct, meaning they were still alive but could no longer reproduce.
Half the life in there just wiped out.
Yeah.
That's a total system collapse.
Complete failure. And what's really fascinating to ecologists is analyzing what specifically died first. The essential pollinators, the bees, the hummingbirds, the butterflies, they were wiped out almost immediately.
Which is an absolute disaster for the agriculture biome. How do you grow food like zucchini or squash without bees to pollinate the flowers?
You do it by hand.
Oh, man.
The starving, oxygen-deprived crew had to spend their precious limited physical energy going out into the fields with little tiny paintbrushes and Q-tips, manually hand-pollinating the crop flowers just to survive.
They became the bees.
They were doing the exhausting work of the insects, yes.
What about the larger animals? The vertebrates? The fish in the ocean, the turtles?
Even worse, 19 out of the 25 vertebrate species brought inside went completely extinct.
That's a 76% casualty rate for vertebrates.
It seems the higher life forms, the more complex neurological creatures, they just couldn't handle the rapid environmental instability. They need stability.
But not everything died, right? Some
Yeah.
things actually loved the chaotic environment in there.
The pests. This perfectly illustrates a very dark fundamental rule of ecology. When an entire system is severely stressed, the highly specialized species die off quickly, and the rugged generalists completely thrive.
The cockroaches.
Cockroaches, ants, and katydids just exploded in population. They practically took over. The ants were particularly aggressive. They were a species they called crazy ants.
Crazy ants.
Yeah, they didn't just passively survive. They actively conquered the dome. They swarmed and killed off the other beneficial insect species. Because they had absolutely no natural predators left, they plenty of rotting dead biomass from the extinct plants to eat, and the warm temperature inside was perfect for breeding.
It became a kingdom of pests.
Exactly.
So just picture this. You have this beautiful $200 million futuristic glass temple, and inside it's filled with silent, starving humans with paintbrushes, dead birds on the ground, and millions upon millions of cockroaches and crazy ants running everywhere.
It sounds like a dystopian sci-fi nightmare, doesn't it?
It really does. Now, there's another ecological oddity from the sources that I really want to bring up. The trees in the rainforest biome.
Ah, the brittle trees.
Yeah. Initially, the rainforest trees grew incredibly fast, right? Because of all the excess carbon dioxide acting like a fertilizer.
They shot right up, massive growth spurts. But then a very weird phenomenon started happening. They would get tall, reach up toward the glass, and then they would just suddenly snap in half.
They would just fall over under their own weight. Why?
Because there was no wind inside the dome.
Wait, that's it. Just because there was no breeze.
Think about how a normal tree grows out in the wild. The wind blows constantly, and the tree is forced to sway back and forth.
Okay.
That physical swaying actually creates mechanical stress on the cellulose fibers inside the trunk. It creates microfractures. The living tree responds to that constant environmental stress by producing what botanists call reaction wood.
Reaction wood.
It's a much denser, stronger type of wood fiber, very rich in lignin. The tree essentially builds structural muscles specifically to resist the force of the wind.
No, the stress of the environment is what literally makes it strong enough to stand up.
Exactly. Inside Biosphere 2, the air was completely dead still. There was no wind. So the trees grew extremely fast, but their internal wood was soft, spongy, and incredibly brittle. They developed absolutely no structural integrity.
So as soon as their branches got heavy with leaves,
Gravity just pulled them straight down. They snapped.
there's a massive, almost philosophical life lesson in that detail.
It's the perfect metaphor. Biological systems, and you can certainly apply this to human beings too, absolutely need resistance and adversity to develop internal strength. A perfectly protected, coddled environment ultimately creates fatal weakness.
So after 2 brutal years of this glass hell,
Hmm.
the mission finally ends. September 26th, 1993. The airlock doors open.
The crew emerged back into the real world. They were gaunt, pale, exhausted, and completely oxygen-starved.
But they had technically done it. They survived the 2 years without dying.
They survived.
But strictly speaking, from a scientific standpoint, the experiment was considered a pretty massive failure, right?
Scientifically, yes. The primary goal was to definitively prove that a materially closed, self-sustaining human colony could work indefinitely.
Which it couldn't.
No. They had to secretly pump in emergency oxygen, they had to constantly struggle and semi-starve for food, and the internal ecosystem almost entirely collapsed into a pest-ridden swamp. If that structure had actually been sitting on the surface of Mars, they likely would have died or gone completely insane.
But the story doesn't end there.
Yeah.
Most people only know about that first famous mission. But our sources highlight that there was actually a second attempt.
Yes, Mission 2 in 1994.
They didn't just give up on a $200 million facility.
Right. They brought in a new team, and they tried to physically fix the engineering mistakes.
Like the concrete.
Exactly. They went in and meticulously coated all the exposed concrete walls with a special chemical sealant to permanently stop the chemical CO2 absorption.
Smart.
They also completely overhauled the farm. They planted different, much higher yield crops, and they installed vastly improved artificial lighting to counter any El Nino cloud cover.
And they fundamentally changed the management style of the crew, right?
Drastically. The first mission was run somewhat democratically among the 8 crew members, which directly led to the gridlock and the bitter factions we talked about.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Right. So the second mission was strictly autocratic. It had a rigid military-style hierarchy, a designated commander, captain's orders were final, and they instituted much better external oversight from management outside the glass.
They wanted ruthless efficiency.
Yes.
So did it work?
No. It was a disaster. It lasted only 6 months before they pulled the plug.
Wow. Only 6 months. Why did it fail so quickly the second time with all those fixes?
Well, the complex biological problems still heavily persisted. Even with the concrete sealed, the oxygen and carbon dioxide levels were still swinging wildly out of control. The ocean biome actually began to turn highly acidic, which started rapidly bleaching and killing the expensive coral reef.
But the biology wasn't the main reason it ended early, was it?
No, the real killer for Mission 2 wasn't the biology at all. It was human nature and money.
Ah, the money always runs out eventually.
Always. Ed Bass, the billionaire backer, had poured hundreds of millions of dollars into this project by this point. It was burning massive amounts of cash every day. Maintenance, energy bills, huge staff salaries.
Right.
The management team outside started viciously fighting over the budget and the scientific direction. There were sudden firings, there were major lawsuits filed. It was getting extremely ugly in the corporate offices.
And then came the actual sabotage.
This is genuinely the wildest part of the whole saga. In the midst of this chaotic management dispute, several members of the original Biosphere, one team who had recently been completely ousted from the project's management, allegedly drove out to the site in the middle of the night.
Like a physical break-in.
A literal break-in. They breached the perimeter, got to the facility, and they intentionally opened the outer airlock doors.
Wait, they just opened the doors to the outside air.
They opened the doors and physically smashed some of the glass seal panels.
Why would they do that? Destroy their own project.
Their legal argument later was that they were deeply worried about the physical safety of the crew locked inside under the new chaotic management and felt they needed to force an end to it.
Wow.
But practically speaking, by letting the outside desert air rush in, they completely corrupted the closed-loop data. The experiment was instantly invalidated. It was over.
So you look at the whole timeline. We have two massive failures. Hundreds of millions of dollars gone. A lot of dead plants and extinct hummingbirds. It is extremely easy to look at this whole story and just say, well, what an absolute waste of time.
You could say that, but that would be the wrong scientific conclusion.
Why?
In science, a definitive negative result is often just as valuable as a positive one. Biosphere 2 taught us crucial, fundamental things about ecology that we simply couldn't have learned any other way.
So let's do the deep dive analysis on the failure itself. Why exactly is it so incredibly hard to put nature in a box?
According to the ecologists who studied the data, it comes down to two really big concepts: complexity and metabolism.
Let's talk about metabolism first.
Yeah.
The sources call it the metabolism of systems.
Right. Break it down by thinking about animals first. Think about a tiny mouse and a giant blue whale.
Okay, mouse and whale.
A mouse has a very rapid heartbeat, maybe 500 beats per minute. It lives incredibly fast, it breathes fast, it consumes massive amounts of energy relative to its size, and it dies fast. If a mouse gets caught in the cold, it freezes to death in a matter of minutes.
Because it has no thermal mass, no buffer.
Exactly, it has zero buffer. Now, the blue whale,
Scale is huge.
massive. It has a heart rate of maybe 2 beats per minute. Everything about it is slow. It has massive thermal inertia from its blubber. It can go for many days without eating anything. It is an incredibly stable biological system.
And Earth, real Earth is the whale.
Earth is the ultimate super whale. Its ecological cycles are incredibly massive and incredibly slow.
Like the water cycle.
Right. Water evaporates from the Pacific Ocean, forms giant storm clouds, drifts slowly over a continent, rains down on a mountain, seeps deep into the soil, flows into a slow river, and maybe returns to the sea. That single cycle can take weeks, years, or even millennia if it hits a deep underground aquifer.
And the atmosphere is huge.
The atmosphere is so unfathomably huge that a massive forest fire burning in Brazil doesn't immediately suffocate a guy walking down the street in Paris. The planet simply absorbs it.
But Biosphere 2.
Biosphere 2 was a mouse. A frantic, hyperactive little mouse. Because the total physical volume inside the glass was so incredibly small, all those cycles accelerated to hyperspeed.
Give me an example of the speed.
You turn on the misting system in the rainforest biome, the water hits the dirt, runs straight into the artificial stream, and is physically back in the ocean biome in 20 minutes.
20 minutes instead of 20 years.
Exactly. Everything happens instantly. On Earth, if you have a sudden spike in carbon dioxide, the global oceans and the massive forests slowly absorb that spike over decades.
But inside the dome,
In Biosphere 2, a spike in CO2 happens in hours. The buffers are simply too small. The human crew physically couldn't react fast enough to fix things. They were just constantly chasing the tail of a chaotic system that was moving vastly faster than they could even think.
that makes total sense. You can't just scale down the physical size of nature and expect it to behave at the same comfortable speed,
Yeah.
it naturally becomes volatile.
Highly volatile. And then there's the issue of complexity.
Right, the hubris of playing God.
We tried to play God and we failed. We threw 3,800 random species together in a glass jar and just arrogantly assumed they would organically figure it out and balance themselves.
But they didn't.
Because we don't actually understand how millions of species truly interact on a microscopic level.
It's the literal butterfly effect.
Literally. You accidentally change the population of one specific unseen soil microbe, and suddenly the carbon cycle shifts. Because the carbon shifts, the bees die. Because the bees die, the crops fail to pollinate. Because the crops fail, the humans begin to starve. Because the humans are starving and exhausted, they stop doing the physical labor to maintain the water filters. The water goes bad, the fish die.
It's a terrifying cascade of failure.
We finally realized that a planetary ecosystem is not just a mechanical machine with dials you can neatly tune. It is a wildly chaotic, deeply interconnected living web. You pull one tiny thread and the whole thing unravels.
So what is the actual status of the Biosphere 2 facility right now? Is it just this abandoned, overgrown glass ruin in the desert full of giant cockroaches?
No, thankfully it's not abandoned. The scientific community recognized the value of the building itself. It was leased by Columbia University for a while to do research, and now it is fully owned and operated by the University of Arizona.
But they aren't sealing crazy people inside for years anymore.
No more closed-loop human survival stunts. It is now run as a massive open laboratory.
How do they use it?
Very cleverly. They use the giant ocean biome to study global coral bleaching. Because it's isolated, they can artificially crank up the water heat or the acidity and study exactly what happens to a living reef in a controlled way without actively ruining a real ocean.
That's brilliant.
They use the enclosed rainforest to study the effects of severe drought on canopy trees. They are doing genuinely valuable world-class climate science there today, but they are absolutely not trying to simulate a self-sustaining Mars colony anymore.
So getting back to where we started this whole deep dive, Elon Musk, Starship, landing on Mars in 2029. After everything we've just discussed, what is the ultimate takeaway here for the space colonization dream?
The cold, hard takeaway is that terraforming a planet is infinitely harder than building a rocket.
We can solve the physics.
We can build a shiny ship to get us there. The physics of orbital mechanics are totally solvable. But once we actually land on the dirt, we cannot simply build an ecosystem from scratch.
We tried it here first.
We tried it on Earth. We tried it with highly breathable, perfect air sitting right outside the glass. With unlimited free sunlight, with emergency rescue crews standing by just a mile down the road, and we still failed completely.
So if we can't even build a stable, tiny biosphere in the friendly suburbs of Arizona, doing it millions of miles away on Mars, where there is heavy radiation, low gravity, and toxic perchlorates mixed into the soil, it just seems...
Impossible might be too strong a word for human ingenuity, but many generations away is highly accurate. The Biosphere 2 experiment forces us to confront a very humble, very uncomfortable truth.
Which is what?
The staggering value of Earth 1.0.
Yeah.
We walk around every day treating the breathable air, the clean water, and the fertile soil here as if they were just cheap, free commodities. We actively pollute them. We pave right over them without thinking.
But Biosphere 2 put a literal price tag on it.
Exactly. To artificially generate just enough barely breathable air and drinkable water to keep just 8 human beings alive for 2 years cost $200 million. And the machine still broke.
The free ecological services that the Earth provides us every single second are actually priceless. We couldn't afford to replace them if we wanted to.
Correct. And when you look back at the brutal extinction data from the experiment, you really have to remember what species died first when the system started to fail.
The vertebrates, the birds, the complex life.
The complex life forms always die first. The human crew barely made it out alive.
But the cockroaches did just fine.
The cockroaches thrived. If the Earth's massive ecosystem ever truly collapses from climate change or pollution, the ancient bacteria and the rugged insects will likely adapt just fine. They are the ultimate generalists.
But we won't.
We are the fragile specialists. We are the precarious ones balancing at the very top of the ecological tower. We fall first.
That is an incredibly chilling thought to end on, but a necessary one. So maybe, before we spend all our time and billions of dollars obsessing over building a shiny backup drive for humanity on Mars, we should probably focus on not actively crashing the single hard drive we're currently using.
That is the ultimate lasting lesson of Biosphere 2.
Yeah.
It was a magnificent, incredibly bold failure that fundamentally proved just how beautifully complex and utterly irreplaceable our home planet actually is.
It really puts things in perspective. I mean, the next time you step outside and just take a deep breath of fresh air,
Yeah.
remember, the concrete building next to you isn't actively trying to steal that oxygen. You didn't have to spend your morning hand-pollinating your lunch with a Q-tip, and you didn't have to pay $1 billion just to survive the afternoon.
Oh,
That is a
yeah.
really, really good deal.
It is arguably the best deal in the known universe.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for listening to this deep dive into the crazy glass bubble out in the desert. It is such a fascinating story of extreme human hubris, incredible dedicated science, and the mind-boggling complexity of the natural web of life.
It's been great exploring it. Keep thinking critically about the world around you.
See you next time.